Today, Tamana, a New York City native now living in Norway with her partner. Together they run House of Tamanaha, a boutique firm dedicated to designing playful and sustainable spaces for the future, honoring the past. In this episode, we dive into personal beliefs, sustainability, and building restoration, explore the impact of competitions and protection, and discuss how many older constructions were sustainable.
Full name or
I'm named for my grandpa, Katsugi. My dad is Okinawan, so my grandpa is Big Cats and I'm Little Cats. But they didn't give me Katsugi because it's a man's name, so I'm just Cats.
And does that mean something, like the abbreviation of cat?
I truly have no idea. To me, it just means my grandpa.
Oh,
I don't actually know what it means. I don't speak Okinawan, so it's a loss. They had during the Japanese occupation, they forced everyone to learn Japanese. So my grandpa fled to Hawaii, where he spoke Japanese and English. So my dad learned Japanese instead of Okinawan. So I don't know beyond that. I'm sure people still speak it today.
What does it mean?
I will say that I believe that my last name, my dad told me it means the sound that wind makes, like Tamanaha. I don't know if he was messing with me. When I graduated with my master's, I got a job in Oslo at like one of my dream firms. So I moved to Oslo, and after living there I've lived a lot of places, studied a lot of things, done a lot of jobs in my life. But when I moved to Oslo, I thought after 1 month, oh, this is the coolest country I've ever lived in. So now I stayed. Now it's been almost 4 years that I've been in Norway.
Met your partner there or here in New York?
I did. I met him in Oslo, and then we moved to the north together. We had already started the firm, but we wanted to launch it here in the north because there's a lot of where we live. It's called Lofoten. Have you heard of Lofoten as the area?
Just because of you.
Oh, really? Oh, that's so fun. So basically it's this region, it's in the Arctic Circle, and it's stunningly beautiful. It's an archipelago. It's thousands of islands connected, and they have like one main chain that's kind of a peninsular archipelago from the mainland of Norway. But because it's some of the oldest formed mountains, I think they're volcanic mountains on Earth, they're these very dramatic landscapes, like massive mountains. And basically in the last 10 years, because of social media, it exploded as a tourism destination. And it was sort of before, but it was kind of far away off the beaten path. So in the last 10 years, they're now getting an average of 700,000 tourists a year. And the entire area, which is 6 hours drive, like end to end, is 25,000 people. So they don't have the infrastructure for the amount of tourism that they're receiving. So we thought it was a great place to come as a firm because we really want to focus on sustainable design and restorations. And so there's a lot of just kind of cabins and old things. People have been living here for centuries. So it's really cool. And there's a lot of investment right now regionally to try to bring up the infrastructure to support the amount of tourism that they're receiving. It's a very special area.
Are you connected with the city, for example, like building the infrastructure? Do you have influence on that, or you?
Not yet. Fingers crossed. We'll see. We have some like hopes for our projects that we're going to propose to the Kommune, the like local county here, to try to build community oriented spaces, but it's a long process and they have a lot going on. So nothing for sure yet, but that would be the hope. Yeah.
I hope you do that because it seems like you're very interested in sustainability. And the way I saw it, it was very common sense, right? You have the knowledge, but also it's like you're not trying to reinvent the wheel in a way, but you're also trying to respect the past and the future. It's very beautiful the way you approach sustainability.
Thank you. That's a sweet thing to say. Yeah, it's just a major motivator for me. It has been for years. So it's one of the reasons why I love Norway is they're really on the forefront of caring about sustainability. And coming from America, it was a little bit of a relief. You get a bit of the weight off your shoulders. But in New York, I was working for my master's thesis. I did a master's in sustainable urban planning as well. And I then worked with my thesis with the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, doing a program on managed retreat, which was really, really cool. And so you kind of get the double-edged sword in a place like Norway where they're so far ahead of the curve that it feels a little bit like, okay, wait, but there's bigger issues that we should be solving, you know? But at the same time, it's really lovely to be in a space where you're not fighting for the core concept anymore. Everyone agrees, like, yeah, this is important. So that's it can be invigorating, you know, to be surrounded by people who also care.
You say the core, it's like your nervous system is relaxed, so you can play, right? So
I totally agree with that. I think there's a lot more space to you feel a lot less heavy about it, and it can become a lot more fun when there's already that like base understanding, you know, so you're not working at just the core concept of, hey, this is such a serious issue, can we please pay attention to it? Instead, you're like, okay, we're all paying attention, like, what can we do? You know, it's a lot more fun.
I had Brothy, and she asked me a question about structures and why specifically in the US, you know, they build with materials that are not very lasting. And I would like to know your perspective.
Yeah, well, it kind of came up just organically on when I was doing the social media talking about one of the projects that we're doing here. A lot of people from America were asking about it. So then I responded and said, yeah, I mean, this is just a reality. But it's pretty interesting, especially because before that I started my own firm, I wasn't necessarily hands-on on these projects. It was one of the reasons I wanted to go off on my own to like really be involved and be able to do everything, you know, for the whole process. But we've been restoring a cabin up here, and the walls are, I can't even show you on the screen, that like so thick. And so it's really remarkable to see, especially coming from America, because it's just so incredibly different. But realistically speaking, they just have a lot better codes essentially for how much strength the building needs to have. And so they end up with a lot thicker walls, and it helps with insulation, of course. And we're in the Arctic, so naturally these things have to be thicker if they're going to be inhabitable. So there's a lot of factors, but it's funny to see, because I do think a lot of American media goes everywhere. And for myself, I love HGTV. I know a lot of people have seen HGTV, and then, you know, they're just kind of banging in walls, and it takes like one swing of a hammer and the wall falls down. It's a little bit like, I do think we create this narrative ourselves a bit, but yeah, it's definitely different.
In my master's in the US, and saw so much of the difference, but also the lack of knowledge of sustainability when building. So because it's so humid there, you know, you have to have cross ventilation. And when I used to see these buildings or design, I'm like, the bathroom doesn't have a window? What?
I mean, I think also, to be fair, I do think like people have a very homogenous view of America, when in reality, like, America is massive and has 7 different climate zones, you know, and like even if you look at Hawaii or New Mexico, like, they do have different building standards, and it is all relative. But I think there is a tendency to see America all as like Ohio or something, you know what I mean? Like, so realistically speaking, of course, naturally in these different areas, you have different building standards, and also just vernacular construction techniques. People who are raised in the area know you need extra ventilation, you need these extra insulation, for example. Like, I do think we give ourselves a bad rap, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, like Kansas City, and I was volunteering a lot in the city because they were bringing the streetcars. So designers, architects, the AIA, you know, we were doing all these events to bring knowledge to, like, how do you commute from work to your job, right? Mm-hmm. And the history of the streetcars. Kansas City had streetcars, right? Them is still there, like underground.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
That then became parks and stuff like that, right? So you can go see, like, obviously a streetcar was here, you know, and a whatever park, right? But the issue was Ford. When the cars came out, he started buying the cars and the carts of the streetcars from different, you know, areas, because he wanted people to have to buy the cars.
Cars, of course. That makes so much sense.
Yeah, so you have the car. Cities can now spread more and more and more.
Right.
And that's how you have the suburbs, which then created that's a whole different topic. From that, they needed more parking. So what was incentive? There was tax incentive. So people started destroying historic 100-year-old buildings to just build parking lots, because then...
I mean, even just the entire history of like the automotive industry in America, and to see this level of scarification on like our urban fabric with Robert Moses and the racism of highways, and like how much got destroyed for cars and the car industry. And then you end up in today where we don't even have any trains. Like that, we don't even have fundamental transportation connections. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous. Like, which is exactly what I was kind of saying earlier. I do think that having lived and worked in America for a very long time, and then having lived and worked in a lot of other nations, I do think that it gets very tiring and you get very worn down from how many things are so, it feels sometimes in America like the system is just very tiring. And then it's really hard to stay creative and to stay hopeful when it's like, oh man, so many things have been built against the people, the community, you know? It gets very tired. So, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I loved it when I moved here. I just thought, oh, I can breathe.
That like breath. I see that you spend a lot of time in nature, but you also are in social media. You also run a business, you know, a household. Like, how do you do it all? How do you manage it?
I mean, I don't, of course. No, there's always something that's not being done that should be being done. I would say, yeah, the key answer is I don't. I think it comes more down to just day by day, what's the priority of that day, and then trying to do as much as you can and then being okay with that. Like, you know, I've spent too many years not sleeping to feel that way now.
So we go back to the creativity and play, which I think you use a word in your messaging about play, right? Or fun, something.
Yeah, when I was first putting together the like taglines for the company, I basically wanted to say that I fundamentally, I think that design should be fun. And I think that there's so much of a narrative of what you should do or shouldn't do, or what's like in or out or whatever. And I feel like that's not the point. It's fun, you know, make something beautiful, make something that makes you happy, especially when it comes to interior design. You're the one inhabiting the space. You should enjoy it. So that was one of the things that I wanted to express with my firm, is that I'm not interested in just doing something because that's what you're supposed to do. I'm interested in like having fun with it and experimenting and seeing what we can do. I think that's the great part of design.
That you have a very like structured way of seeing certain things. Like, I remember one of your videos was this beautiful land, but they have a building that has to be demolished. And
I think in general, it's a personal philosophy. One of the reasons why I even got into any of this, like I said, sustainability is a really large driver for me as a human being. And I just find it very difficult sometimes to kind of just create for the sake of creating. And if we can have something that we're restoring, it's just something I would prefer to do ultimately. So I want to, in my life and in architecture, avoid destruction when it's unnecessary. And something like that house, it was really dilapidated, and it would be great to go in and see like what you can salvage. But frankly, that was just too much of a task for what we were interested in doing. So it didn't work out, because it takes a lot longer usually to be able to disassemble things that weren't built to be disassembled and then see what you can salvage, which is why most people don't do it or don't bother. So
that you're very clear on your mission and your vision, and anything that it's not within that constraints or structure, it's like, no, I don't have time for you. And I think that's powerful.
Thank you. That's really sweet.
Move the fluff, and then you're very focused on what you want.
Yeah. So. No, absolutely. And I think it also comes down to, of course, realistically speaking, we're in the beginning stages of starting this firm. We're not in a position to turn most things down. It's more of when it's things that are coming from ourselves that we're interested in doing ourselves. Of course, we want to do it the way that we want to do it. Yeah. Otherwise, why?
Yeah, design of your table, like how he really does explain like what you just mentioned about, like, you know, I'm not interested in that because of this. You also mentioned that in the design of your table, which is like, I don't like screws. So
that's so funny. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah. I was like, well, if it's going to be my table, I don't want to have to screw it together. That's annoying. I'm not going to do that.
I buy this table.
It would have been so cool. It was when I made it to, and it like flat packs perfectly. And there was a brief couple days where we were like, should we sell this to IKEA? And I thought, too much stuff going on.
I think it's Blue Dot, and they have a chair. They have a chair that comes in a pizza box. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen a pizza box chair. That sounds amazing. But I've heard of Blue Dot. I've seen their stuff.
So I ordered one because I'm fascinated with this. You know, when I saw your chair, I'm like, oh my God. Your table, sorry. It would have been a great addition to that chair.
I mean, I think really what it is I'm one of those people that it seems like you might be as well, where I'm just interested in so many things that if I don't put parameters on it, like I will go insane.
Have limited resources in the island. You do trade. So you trade with other people and or you use money. But I was wondering about this trade. I think I have this other theory that maybe the future of humanity is going to go back to trading in some ways or exchanges, collaborations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, but it does bring up a lot of abundance and it could bring eventually. So tell me more about that and how.
Yeah, I totally agree. Honestly, I think just in general that so much of, you can already see it happening now. So much of social media has allowed us to rebuild community in a lot of really interesting ways. And I think there's of course validly a huge focus on mental health, like detrimental effects from social media, especially on young people. But at the same time, I think that there's another side of it that's maybe harder to study, but that I have noticed, which is that you're able to really connect in a way that's a lot more organized and a lot more direct, tailored to what you're interested in. So if you think of even things like outside of standard social media channels, but even things like Depop, right? And here in Norway, they have TISA. It's like there's programs for bartering, trading, selling on a very low price, being able to make these exchanges that ultimately is just a way of building community. That was how we did it way back when. And now, because we live in such more urbanized societies, it's a lot harder to build like networks of people that are interested in the same things that you're interested in. And I think one of the fun things about living on this island, beyond the fact that it's an island, so it's really cool, but also is that it has a Facebook group, and it's the island Facebook group. And so people post on it and say like, hey, I found this dog leash, and you're like, oh, I lost it, thank you. It's very simple, and it's like very, as somebody from Queens, probably for a lot of people that seems natural, but I have never had that before. And so it's really lovely just to see like what it's like to kind of be able to be so close with your neighbors, just on even a very logical basis, not even about having barbecues, but just literally being able to talk to your neighbors because you need the same thing, or they might have something that you might have wanted or didn't know you want. I think it's a really cool, I feel like it's a really cool way to live that I've never experienced before I moved here.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And it takes off a little bit of pressure of being a human and not having to be this perfect or having everything figured out. Or if you forgot to buy this material, someone in the island is going to at least give you a temporary solution until you can find that.
Yeah, it's very cool. Solution. It is very cool. And it does feel very like old school, I guess,
Back to the Dominican Republic, to a small beach town called Las Tejadas. And they're building a lot. I left because of that, because of what like the country calls development. And development is just like building without taking into consideration the infrastructure. That's why I was interested on the infrastructure if we were going to be involved, because I tried, but there's so many political gain that everyone is like fighting for it, right? But because people are already aware of sustainability in where you are, maybe it would be completely different and you do have a say. Is a lot of people were coming from outside of the island to invest, right? And one of the things that were popular during COVID, and I think it still is, maybe not completely sure, it's about sustainable communities, right? Because people wanted to be closer to nature. But what happened? There aren't really materials in the island to create the sustainable. So you would have to import a lot of the material or start from scratch, like growing bamboo, but structural bamboo, right? And that it's a really long-term initiative, and a lot of people don't have the time nor the money to do that. So it's a slow process. But what I realize is like, okay, what really is sustainability? If in this country we do make cement, right? We do make these things, maybe using these materials that already exist in the island, that doesn't specifically have to be imported or have a huge expense, right? Then we can use that and create some sustainability. So I go back to sustainability for me equals common sense. What do you think
I
about
think it also really sounds like life cycle analysis. It seems really common sense. And it was only when in my sustainability master's, we had a course on life cycle analysis and being able to do it. And it was one of those things that it's so intuitive, but you never think about. But it's the same concept of, okay, the reusable tote bag only actually becomes more sustainable than the plastic tote bag if you've used it 100 times, for example. But basically the concept is you have to look at every stage of a material as part of that material's carbon footprint or impact on the earth. And so exactly what you're saying is right. If you compare cement that's locally made to imported cross-laminated timber, that cross-laminated timber might on paper seem like a more sustainable option, but actually if you factor in all of the transportation costs, the transportation emissions, the weights, moving everything, going back and forth between production facilities, bringing it to this location, not to mention how many jobs you're creating locally, you end up being able to see that through the entire life cycle, often, what makes more sense is actually more sustainable. But then what's fun about life cycle analysis is that then you have proof. And then you're like, oh, look at that. So there's really cool platforms that you can do. You can import. They have thousands of materials. You import where you are, you input where you are and what the material is and how much you would need. And then you can compare that life cycle footprint to any other material. So for something like in the DR, cement versus imported wood, you can put in both things, the quantities, the exact location, and it will tell you based off of data that it's quantified. Because otherwise, the other element of it is it feels like an impossible task, right? How do you know how much the truck weighs and how many times it goes back and forth from this factory to the procurement factory to the sealant factory? You know what I mean? So they have really cool now platforms where they've already gathered not all, but a lot of that data for you. And then you can just input and it's one of the ways that a lot of companies are doing for their products life cycle analysis is using these platforms. It's really cool.
Any go-tos or?
We did it on One Click LCA, and I think there's also one that's called Ladybug, but don't quote me on that. I exactly what you're saying, or at least for myself, I love it when you can point to actual statistics and be like, haha.
In school, it's like I wanted to push myself so much to do like form and function and all of this and be a little bit different, right? And then I realized years later I would see like design similar to what I did in school, right? And then I was like, really nothing has been truly almost nothing has not been invented, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you honor that a lot in your way, in your practice.
I had which actually hilariously, right before this, I was just filming my next TikTok is going to be about this because for some reason, this came up. I had a memory and I was like, oh, that's actually such a cool story. So I will tell you the story now because I haven't posted the TikTok yet. So when I had this very like light bulb moment, which was in retrospect such an obvious concept. It had just literally never occurred to me. But I had my friend and I, we received a research grant when we were in grad school to go down to Mexico City and study this UNESCO World Heritage building, the city hall that was from the 1500s. And it had just been nominated at the time to lead silver, and now it's platinum, which I just checked because I was making the video. Now it's platinum, which is super cool. And with UNESCO World Heritage buildings, you have to be ridiculously careful with what you do to the building. So they had done a renovation and they got lead silver. And basically we were like, our proposal for the grant was, how did they do this? It's a building they can barely touch. So we flew to Mexico City. We interviewed the sustainability consultants who worked on the project. We went through the building. We studied it. It was really cool. It was a really great time. But when I was talking to the sustainability consultants, we said, like, how did you manage to get it that far without damaging the historicity of the building? And she looks at us and she's like, well, we just took out all the new stuff. And we were like, what? And she was like, well, the building functioned before we had air conditioning and like before we had all these things, the building worked well. So we just took out everything people added in and brought it back to how the building was made. And now it's self-sustaining again. I see exactly. And I'll never forget, I was sitting there and I was like, this is the smartest and yet most obvious concept I have ever How did that never occur to me? And so then it became just an obsession of like how much actually we are so blinded by modern technology that when we think of ancient times, yeah, of course, whatever, chamber pots and the Black Plague, yes. But at the same time, they had to build buildings in all these different climates that would be adequate shelters. And they did them and they were beautiful. And so, of course, they actually did figure out pre all of our inventions, pre all of our technology, how to make inhabitable structures that were self-sustaining. Mind blowing. But so obvious. I don't know. So I think that really just informed me ever since. I'll never, I don't know, I'll never be the same how I think about architecture.
Yeah, and obviously it translates into your life and
Yeah.
how you live your life now. It's very clear that that did impact you.
Yeah, it was one conversation and I walked out of there and I was like, okay, well, clearly I've been an idiot because this has never occurred to me, but it seems so obvious in retrospect. And I mean, that's the thing, like we can learn so much architecturally, also like just when it comes to technology and when it comes to how society functions with ancient. I love history. I'm a history person.
Decide to participate in this competition, and what drives you apart from all the things you're doing to actually take time to submit
Do the
projects?
competitions.
Yeah.
It's like competitions are my passion project. I've done them since I was in grad school. And like, I don't know, I just think they're really, for me, what I love about competitions. I did them a lot at the firm that I used to work at as well. And now the difference is I don't have a salary. It's like just myself. So it's a little bit more of a commitment, but I do them with one of my good friends that we worked together previously at a different firm, and we would work on different competitions. But I think for me personally, the joy of competitions is that you get to just go back to the purely creative side of architecture. I mean, of course, there's practical parameters. They want a specific program. They have usually like square meters that you need to reach and like general sustainability goals that you need to reach. But I think one of the coolest things about it is it's such an early phase that you really just get to experiment, and like and within those parameters, and they're always in different locations. So in the EU, most countries, or if not all countries, have to publish any like public impact project for open tender, like for competitions. So we've done now one actually in America, one in Romania, and then one in Norway. And now we're looking into finding our next one. So we do them every couple months, but then you can't do them too often because it takes up so much time. But it's really fun because it's basically like, in a way, it takes you back to your school days. You just get to imagine, and you're not really worried about the budget or the person's taste because you don't know who's judging it anyway. It's just purely like you get to have fun and experiment and imagine what you would like to be there. And realistically speaking, these competitions are open globally, so they're very, very rare chance to win one. But it's more for me about, I think it lets you use your brain in a different way that you don't really get to when you're doing real, like actual projects, because there's so many different factors there. You have the budget, you have the client, you have what the parameters are. It's not the same muscle, I think, that it is when you're doing just like these purely theoretical competitions. Plus, if we won one, it would be amazing. So it's like, you got that too.
Yes.
A platform for competitions that I fully will not participate in because I feel I don't think it's a very equitable platform for architects. So I think that it might be one of them because I see them all the time. It's usually when you have to pay to be a part of it, and it's not going to be a realized thing, in my opinion. I think it's a little bit exploitative of students that are very hopeful and want to participate in the world, So I'm not pro that certain platforms.
So the competitions you apply to are free globally.
Free. Yeah. And so the difference too is, so also when I was in grad school, we won a competition. It was a student competition. It was free, but it was hosted by HUD. So United States Housing and Urban Development Department. And these are like the ways that so this one, it was for an actual town, and like the city government, it was with my urban planning program that we had applied, which was really exciting. But they actually needed advice for the actual like city in California. And these other competitions, they're hosted by local governments. So it's like public projects that are done. They have to be hosted. They have to be posted for free. And I personally, having a lot of experience with competitions in a lot of different ways, I find that especially for students, it's very easy to go down this rabbit hole of paying hundreds of dollars to submit on these competitions where you are competing against thousands of other students and your prize win is never going to be realized. It's a relatively minuscule portion of the prize pot that they're gathering. And I find it personally exploitative. So I think if you are interested, if any students are interested or practicing professionals are interested, the best way to do it is to look on government websites to find like actual tender competitions that are always free to enter and are for real contracts. That would be my plug.
Beautiful. Oh my God. Do you consider yourself an activist, or do you use another?
Definitely. Back in the day, when I was in America, yeah. When I'm here, it's like, what am I activizing against?
Really, and the language you use and the way you express it, it's very refreshing. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for for coming on. Yeah, and trusting me, and so. But hopefully, this is the first time of many collaborations.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Have a good day.